Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host Ren, and today we continue with the Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, Prologues 2 and 3, Lady Poe's Birthday, and then Born in a Jar. And then we'll be done with the prologues. We'll get into part 1 of the first book, The Dead Held Hands, which is called Kay and Sam. So last week we took a pretty horrific and somewhat obsolete ride through the Temple of the Exploding Head, the namesake of the book. The temple has many names, but that is one of them. And when I was writing this, my wife is like, yeah, is that really what you're going to call this? And I'm like, yes, indeedy Petey, the Temple of the Exploding Head. It just rolls out. And the things we saw, the temple was creepy, deep under the ground, lots of horrific things happening, and things have been happening there in a bad way for ages, without stop. Now, I say this was a somewhat obsolete ride because that was basically draft 1, and the later drafts, the nature of the occupants and of the temple itself changed a little bit. So you're getting glimpses, even though I updated it. I put in key phrases here and there to make it current with the later drafts. But for the most part, it was like it was in draft 1, and we're not quite rolling in that direction. The temple is still freaking creepy. Bad things are still going on. I think even worse things are going on in the later drafts. And we'll get back to that place later. It just gives me the creeps just talking about it. Today, we're going to finish the prologues. Prologue 2, Lady Poe's Birthday. And I want to assure you that nothing in these books is frivolous. Everything moves the plot forward. I don't really go on any self-indulgent writing excursions in this where I'm just describing nothing for no good reason. Everything in here is, I had gotten to the point in my writing journey where I was using a lot of economy in my writing. Very concise, not that much flowery description. I mean, I give you the descriptions you need, but I don't really indulge myself and just create floral prose just for the hell of it. No, we move the plot forward. So everything in here assists in that, is a building block of the story and moves the plot in a certain direction. We'll get Lady Poe, and Lady Poe is only a couple pages, and then we get to the big one, Prologue 3, Born in a Jar. And that, I'm confident in saying, is the most important chapter in the entire omnibus. That chapter is critical, because if that chapter doesn't work, the whole story isn't going to work. We'll get to that. First, let's check out Lady Poe's Birthday, prologue number 2, see what's up, and then we move on. This is only 3 pages, once again, but these are very small text, very light spacing, so it's more like 5, I guess. Let's proceed right now.
We used to be evil once, and the gods are still punishing us.
Lady Poe of Blanchefort's birthday was on February 14th, apparently the date of an ancient holiday proclaiming love and togetherness, although by the Canaan calendar, February had 34 days instead of the ancient count of 28. Still, it was appropriate, for Lady Poe was such a kind, loving person, adored by all who knew her. As the month of February sat towards the very end of the cold winter season in the Vithlands of Cana, Poe and her family lived in their warmer southern residence, the Duke of Olin's grand manor outside the city of Effington in the Esterlands, her husband, Lord Peter, being in service to and good friends with the Duke of Olin, was invited to live there with his family as he pleased. They had a whole wing to call their own. To celebrate her birthday every year, the Duke and his Duchess, Lady Jane, threw a large party with Poe as the guest of honor. Poe's brother and his wife, Lord Davidge and Countess Sigillis of Blanchefort, helped in the planning and financing of the party and were always in attendance. Unfortunately, Countess Sigillis and Duchess Jane hated each other. Their long-running feud went back to their sordid days as Black Hats and was a constant source of A-list news and gossip around the league. Socialites were always eagerly curious to see which of the two would make a fresh, snide remark or fire a sarcastic quip about the other. There was even talk of heated private meetings and secluded hair-pulling fistfights conducted between the two. However, for Lady Poe's birthday party, they mutually agreed to a truce and behaved themselves. Lady Poe certainly loved grand parties and spared no expense, but truth be told, it was the quiet, private celebration she enjoyed with her family that was her favorite birthday treat of all. Her husband, Lord Peter of Blanchefort, formerly of Ruthven, usually had a surprise or two cooked up for her, a little something that he had baked himself or possibly a clever trinket that he had made, something quaint and handcrafted. Lord Peter had skilled hands, and Lady Poe loved receiving handmade gifts from her husband. Coming from a house minor, Lord Peter was outranked by the House of Blanchefort and took its name by tradition upon their union. The often caustic social scene on Cana was abuzz with the union, and a few great houses tried to block it through legal channels, stating that such a mismatched marriage in status violated league law. Others speculated that it would never last. However, Peter and Poe shared a loving relationship and held fast and grew through the years. Their children also came up with something neat for their mother on her birthday. Milos, their eldest son, sometimes wrote her a poem or a story which she listened to, eyes closed, hand in hand with Peter. Milos was so bright and creative that it was easy for him to come up with such things and captivate his mother. The twins, Sarah and Philip, had a harder time. They couldn't simply go out and buy Mother something, for Lady Poe of Blanchefort already had everything she wanted. They weren't quite as artistic as their older brother Milos, so they would knock heads for weeks, trying to come up with something witty and charming to present to her. Fortunately for them, Sarah was the spitting image of her late grandmother, Countess Hermione, Lady Poe's mother, and usually Sarah and Philip acted out a scene from Hermione's past, which many times involved some sort of sword fight or duel, as the late Countess had been a known pugilistic hothead in her day. Lady Poe watched their performances and clapped, giving the twins a big kiss on the cheek when they were finished. Also, if they really got desperate, all Sarah had to do to make her mother happy was put on a gown, which, being a prototypical tomboy, was a tough chore for her. Their fourth child, Millicent, or just Millie for short, got a pass up to this point. She was still babbling in a high chair and couldn't actively participate, not for a few years still. And there was a final child of sorts who always showed up on Poe's birthday, the one who brought with him the most surprises and jokes of all, Carahil. Lady Poe, being a mighty Silvertech female, had made Carahil in a Vith fountain at Castle Blanchefort some 25 years prior. Her brother, Lord Davidge, often told dinner-time stories of a saintly silver seal he had befriended in the Zaffin city of Metatron, and Poe, listening, was inspired and recreated Carahil in Silvertech. She put a lot of effort into it, spending months of exhausting work until the fountain was overflowing with silver. When Carahil opened his eyes, he was wise and powerful in the form of a silver seal. As such, Carahil soon became a full member of the Celestial Arboreum, and he soared over the cosmos, defending balance and righting wrongs. In short, Lady Poe of Blanchefort, using her Silvertech, had created a god and was its mother. Such was the extent of her power and the width of her character, to be content as an unassuming wife and mother, rejoicing in the simple things, her vast power kept in check by her love for her husband and her children. Carahil was so busy spanning the heavens far from home that he rarely saw his mother anymore. But, like a good son, he always remembered to visit Lady Poe on her birthday. He usually tried to sneak up on Poe and scare her. Carahil's love of pranks still knew no end. He'd jump out from behind a huge potted plant. Duchess Tori Jane loved plants, and Grand Effington was a literal botanical garden in certain places. Or he'd cut the lights and appear from out of nowhere. Carahil loved making a grand entrance. Everybody loved Carahil, and once everybody recovered from their shock, they'd give him a huge hug. He reveled with his family for a time, telling stories, playing with the children, and basking in his mother's presence. After a bit, the Duke and Duchess Tori Jane would come out and sit with Carahil as well, for they were his friends too. On this particular occasion, Carahil seemed a bit put off. He wasn't quite his normal happy self. He twitched his whiskers and asked if the children could give himself and his mother a few minutes in private. With a cry of displeasure, they exited the area, the Duchess promising to give them all a treat from the kitchen. "Please, Lord Peter, stay," Carahil said. "You need to hear this too." Alone in the room, just the three of them, Lady Poe looked at Carahil, that happy-faced silver seal. She sensed danger. "Is there something wrong, Carahil?" He twitched his whiskers. "Yes, Mother, there is." Poe was shocked. Carahil usually didn't just come right out and say something. He enjoyed making people coax information out of him. His stark, concise answer alarmed her. She gently placed her hands on the dome of his smooth silver head. "What is it?" she asked. "I've come to you for advice, Mother, and for help. I need your help, and yours as well, Lord Peter." "Anything, Carahil, anything we can do," Lady Poe said. Carahil reveled in her touch. Though he was a god with power supreme, he found comfort and solace in the soothing touch of his mother's hand, as any child did. Finally, he spoke. "I need you to help me save the League, Mother." And then Carahil told them. And with that, we conclude Prologue 2, Lady Poe's birthday. So, we meet, once again, Lady Poe. If you've read the previous League of Elder books, Hazard of the Old Ones, Book 1, Sigillus of Metatron, you know Lady Poe, the sister of Captain Davidge, who lived most of her life in infirmity, and it was because she was a Silvertech female. And when Captain Davidge brought Sigillus home to Castle Blanchefort, Sig being a ex-Black Hat, Sigillus immediately figured out what was wrong with her. She'd been thought to be mad all her life, and Sig figured it out. And under Sig's tutelage, Lady Poe mastered her Silvertech powers, and she became quite powerful. The things she could create, she loved creating little animals and trinkets and whatnot, and it would have Sig scratching her head like, wow, I don't know if I could create something like that, but Lady Poe can, and she created Lieutenant Kylos's Tweeterbird. She created Tweeter, lots of other little familiars that run around the castle, and then she created Carahil, and Carahil was so well made he became a god. And when she created him, it wasn't that much of an effort for her, so you can imagine just how powerful she actually is. And in the later book, The Shadow Tech Goddess, we learn a few things about Lady Poe. And anywho, it discusses her children. We mentioned Lord Milos, the oldest child of Lady Poe of Blanchefort, and her husband, Lord Peter. Milos is never seen in the books at all. We hear his name every so often, but don't really see him. Sarah and Philip, the twins, we're going to see a lot of in this particular book. And then we see them again in the Bloodstein books as well. Sarah and Philip, the twins. And then she talks about Millie. Millie's just a toddler at this point, but in a whip I'm working on right now, we see Millie fully grown. And yeah, she's something else. Anywho, Carahil shows up to celebrate Lady Poe's birthday, being unusually forthright and concise in his answers. He just comes out and says, Mother, I need your help. I need you to help me save the League. So that's pretty dire sounding. Dire indeed. And that's where we leave off Prologue 2. Now, let's move on to Prologue 3, Born in a Jar. And before I previously said this is one of the most important chapters in the book. And it is, because if the events of this little chapter, and it's not really little, it's kind of a medium-sized chapter, if the events in this chapter don't resonate, if they ring hollow, if you don't buy what's going on, the rest of this book, the rest of the omnibus will fall flat. We're going to meet some characters. We're going to meet one of the main heroines of the book. And if you watch carefully in the title illustrations we came up, we see a lot of this lithe, chalk white, black-haired, black-eyed girl. And we're going to meet her in this chapter. And we're going to find out that she is devoted to someone. She loves someone deeply. And the whole purpose of this chapter is to make you understand why she feels that way, that we get a glimpse into what her thought process is, what led her to this point, why she feels the way she does. Because we're going to find out the person of her adoration she's never met, never spoken a word to up to this point. And that person is also not yet a day old, hasn't even been born yet. So why? Why does she feel this way? I could take the Disney route and just tell you, hey, this is Sam, and she loves person XYZ. Trust me, she adores this person. Yeah, that's all you need to know. Let's move on. No, that's not all you need to know. That is just telling and not showing. You need to see why she feels the way she does, and you need to understand what she went through and what led her to this point. In this chapter, Born in a Jar, will attempt to do that. We put in the work, we put in the effort to weave this story to show you why she cares so much. We're also going to find out a lot about Sam, her family, their hopes, their dreams, and the things that terrorize them. Let's proceed immediately. This is a bit longer chapter, but this, again, be cognizant of the fact that I'm trying to, in writing this chapter and presenting it as is, I'm trying to show you why she loves and is devoted to a person she's never met. Let's proceed, shall we? Prologue 3, Born in a Jar. Her family didn't often come out of the fog. That was a sure way to bring the demons. She had seen the Canaan sun many times, a lot more than her brothers and sisters ever had, though she was a girl not yet 10 years old, the youngest of her large family by far. She was born in a jar, a blessed birth by any measure. Her ancient home on the black hill by the lake was thick in perpetual fog. Even the brightest noon was little more than a dull gray twilight at Castle Astralon. To see the sun meant to venture a distance from the lakeshore where the fog ended, but few ever wanted to do that. Again, fear of the demons ruled everything they did. But that was they, her family and neighbors, not her. Fearless, she often traveled far enough from the fog near the lake to see the sun, to marvel at it, to feel its warmth. She had done it lots of times and never once encountered a demon. That's where he was, out there in the sun somewhere. the little boy she'd fallen in love with. Great fecundity was a common feature of her people. All the tribes multiplied with abandon. She had 24 brothers and 47 sisters. She was the youngest of the bunch by 3 months. She was born in a clutch of 12, a rather standard amount in her family. The searchers discovered her tiny, partially developed embryo mixed in with the others, who were fully formed and ready to be born. "An Inuian is born to us. We are blessed," they cheered as she was whisked away and placed in a brine-filled jar. There she stayed for another 3 months, completing her development in the warm water and knocking when she was ready to come out. As she grew, it became clear she was slightly different from the rest of her family. Though still only a girl, she was fuller, sturdier than others her age, with larger eyes than usual, long eyelashes, and notched lips. She was stronger and faster than the rest. It was clear she was a rare birthing among the Monamas. She was an Inuian, a greater Monama, and a treasure for Castle Astralon. The Inuians, she was told, rebelled and fought the demons long ago and were hunted down and wiped out for their temerity, leaving the smaller, more docile Konaks or lesser Monamas for the demons to torture. Though gone, occasionally an Inuian was born amongst the Konaks and placed in a jar and was a jewel for their house. Already the tribes offered their sons to her, to the girl born in a jar. With all those brothers and sisters every generation, one should expect her family to be massive, getting exponentially larger with every generation until they filled 100 Castle Astralons. Alas, such was not the case. The demons kept them thinned out. Every year, and with greater frequency, she lost aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, and sisters to the demons. Sometimes they vanished in the night. Sometimes they would be sitting right there getting dressed, eating their breakfast or telling a story, and in a flash they were gone, their utensils clattering out of air to the table below. Vanishing into thin air wasn't an overly unusual thing. Her people could disappear and travel great distances at will. It was a talent they all shared. But this was different. This is for good. The demons had gotten them. According to their ancient stories, they as a people had been evil once, long ago in the mists of time, and the gods, in jade and sapphire, would not allow them to forget it. The demons. When the demons came, one never returned. Such was the sadness her people had endured for ages. Sudden death was something they lived with, both from the demons that tormented them to the sundry wounds they chose to inflict upon themselves. There were the duels they fought, sometimes over petty arguments and misunderstandings. When her people fought, it wasn't a pretty thing to see. They were strong and had nails that could scratch iron. And there were the trials. One couldn't even enjoy the act of falling in love without the prospect of death lingering. One of her brothers had been killed while at trial. He had fallen in love with a girl from Nebulon on the other side of the lake, and the trials for her love had killed him. One of her sisters had committed suicide after her love, a boy from the Zerb tribe, had been killed while at trial for her. Unwilling to live without him, she soon followed him in death. She had lost 30 brothers and sisters to the demons, and she had lost her parents as well in such a fashion. They kissed her to bed one night, and in the morning they were gone, never to be seen again. She was raised mostly by her grandmother, a large, bold woman, an Inuian born in a jar just like she had been. All she had left of her mother and father was the jar she had been born in, which she kept on her windowsill. Sometimes she grieved so much for her lost family that she forgot who she was and could do nothing but sit there, eyes blank, staring at ghosts. Her grandmother sang to her at such times with her magical voice to pull her back from her delirium. Her name was Sammidoran. In her native Anui tongue, Sammidoran meant the far one in the female case. and she lived up to her name, for she was young and rather impulsive, doing things Astralon girls usually didn't do. That was the Inuian coming out of her, defiant and strong. She loved to run with the wild herds of gazelle and other grassland animals that grazed beyond the perimeter of her fog-bound home. With them, she bounded through the grasslands, easily keeping up with the herd, running in the sun that she cherished so much. She ran all the way to the forest once, and sometimes to the sea, reveling in all the things her family feared. An odd paradox, she sometimes thought. Her people, even the common lesser ones, were mighty, gifted, swift, and strong, yet they were powerless against the demons. The demons could not be met. The demons could not be crossed. The demons could not be fought. So she was told. Sammidoran had no friends to speak of. Some of the children in Castle Cardinal, whom she knew, were all taken by the demons, and so were the Nebulons and the young Minzer children. The others who were left were afraid of her. The animals she ran with and the golden sun high above were her only sure companions. The demons could never take those from her. She began having visions when she was 5 years old. All of her kind had visions, and hers were especially vivid. She could see the future, and she didn't want to. Many of her family saw their deaths in their visions at the hands of the demons, and they crumpled up in sadness and waited for it to happen, waited for the end to come. She watched one of her brothers waste away in such a state. She went to her grandmother and pleaded, "Why? Why does this have to be?" And her grandmother calmed her as only she could and said, "Nothing has to be. Nothing is indelibly etched. If you see a bad future or you see a darkness coming, then make it better. Keep your head clear and fight for what you want, as I have done. How do you think I've lived for so long?" Her aunts and uncles didn't like that sort of talk. What sort of thing was that to tell a child, filling their heads with dreams and impossibilities? Their motto was simpler and much more stark. Live your life while you can and hope for the best, and when the end comes, let your head swarm and take you to places where there is no pain and no sadness, where the demons can't hurt you, as if such a place could exist. Though she was just a little girl, she took exception to her aunts and uncles' advice to give up and fade away, to be so frightened that the only place to hide was deep within oneself. What sort of life was that? On her runs far from home, she sometimes saw her gazelle being chased by predators. They didn't just give up, lay down and be eaten. They ran. They ran until they could run no more, and oftentimes eluded the predators that stalked them. Mostly, the predators went home hungry. And there was a lesson to be learned in that, she thought. Just because a monster was chasing close behind and meant to do you harm, did not mean it was going to get you. She kept that thought in her heart. Her visions began in the smoky pools of her dreams, and there was no denying them. She had visions of people beyond the fog, the elders who had come from the sky, the people with hair of differing colors, the people with alluring eyes, the color of the sky, the forest and the earth. She often heard her brothers and sisters talking about dreaming of the elders in their faraway cities, their Arendans and Selitilas, and how sad the dreams made them. She thought it was a lot of nonsense. Why would a mere dream make them so sad? But now she was dreaming of the elders herself, and experience it was quite a bit different from merely hearing about it. In fact, it was overwhelming. She saw herself night after night as a grown woman, tall and thin, standing on a hillside. She wore a black Bronta-covered gown with the usual Astralon bustle. Next to her was a man with oddly colored hair, even for an elder, a tail coat and a black three-pointed hat. A long silver weapon hung at his side. Somehow, she got the impression that the silver weapon at his side was her weapon, that it belonged to her. In the future, he gave it to her on his knees, and she accepted it, writing her name into the shaft with her claw-like fingernails. Sammidoran. It was cold where they were standing. Cold was bad. Cold hurt and could quickly end her life as surely as the demons could. But for some reason, the cold was not bothering her. She was resisting it. A special charm at her neck kept her warm. Where did she get such a thing? She wondered. She saw a great castle in the cold mountains. She saw her grandmother at the castle talking to the elder lord and countess. She appeared to be friends with those people. Her folk rarely bothered much with the people beyond the fog, except for the occasional fortune-telling and prostitution that provided them with their meager incomes. Her grandmother, however, was an exception. As night after night unfolded, she saw the man younger and younger each time. Most often she dreamed of the man with the weapon as a little boy, far away, living in that castle in the mountains. He was a boy with a perfect face and strangely colored hair. His eyes, look at his eyes, like the forest-colored pebbles on the lakeshore. They melted her, and look what his eyes could see. At first, she tried to distance herself from the image of the boy, to watch him impassively. She didn't want to become enraptured by her elder vision, as her brothers and sisters before her had. But every night there he was, emerging from the shadows, drawing her ever closer to him, lured in by the wondrous things he wanted to share with her. She was haunted by the little boy. Even as she opened her eyes in the first moments of morning, she could still hear his laughter. A word began to enter her thoughts, one that she had previously thought silly and quaint. Aaron Dan. It meant beloved and dreamed of. As with her brothers and sisters, this little boy was more and more becoming her Aaron Dan. He was bright and cheerful in her dreams. He had an inviting smile, and he was loving and kind, making her laugh, showing her interesting elder things in his castle, and inviting her to sample delights from their kitchen. Her visions were so real that in the morning she often forgot the things she experienced were merely parts of a dream. It was heartbreaking sometimes to wake up and not have him there, to know that all the wonderful things she'd seen and tasted were not real. She saw moments of sadness when he was hurting. His people were cruel to him. They thought him flawed and weak, and she wanted to reach out and comfort him. If they didn't see the value in him, she at last did. Don't weep, my Aaron Dan. Yet there was another thing he introduced her to as time passed. Desire. He was handsome, even as a little boy, and he had that elder belly button that her people found so attractive. Trying to be coy, she ran from him through the corridors of her dreams, and he chased her. And when she could stand it no longer, she allowed him to catch up, and together they fell into a feathery pile of bliss. Invariably, the dream ended, and she would awake, her thin body alone and aching. "Come back here," she'd say. "Finish what you started." Still, he wasn't perfect by any means. He was a bit spoiled and self-indulged. He was loath to take action, to be as great as he could. He was a loafer, and she hated that. It infuriated her, but that stage wouldn't last. No, she saw him transform from a loaf to a great Vith Lord, mighty and brave. All he needed was a push. She saw him taking her into his arms, and she could feel his embrace, and once there she felt safe and content. In his arms, nothing else mattered, not her family, and not even the demons. That's where she wanted to be, safe and sound with him. And she told her brothers and sisters about her visions, and they understood. They too had had dreams of their Aaron Dans and Sila Tilas, and they told her such dreams were dangerous and would bring the demons. She must be rid of them for her sake, and for his as well. They advised her on what needed to be done. Pick a ceremonial white amelia flower from the wild and go to the blackened morning wall near the lake and plant it there. They told her that once she completed this task, the visions of the little boy will fade, and it will hurt for a while. It will hurt terribly, but then it will be gone, and she will be all right. She took their advice, went out and picked a single white Amelia flower and took it to the Morning Wall, which was just a blackened fragment from an old Anuian castle that the demons had destroyed centuries earlier. Around the base of the wall was a dense bed of white Amelia flowers, all planted there by her kin, hoping to rid themselves of their visions. Holding her flower, she thought of the little boy somewhere out there beyond the fog. She thought of his laughter and his arms around her, and what it would be like to not have that anymore. All those forsaken dreams growing there in a carpet of white. And the Anuian in her spoke. She did not want the dream to end. She wanted it to be real. She wanted her Arendan, and turning, she walked back home and planted the white Amelia in her jar, a reminder to herself of what she almost let go. Time passed. Her dreams continued and became more and more vivid. Her Arendan was powerful, could do many things. She saw him turning invisible, mouth open, heart fluttering. She watched him flying through the sky in blasts of wind, and his lovely eyes, his sight, splendid in time, can save both your souls. All he needed was a little push, and he could be great. But there was darkness too, horrible things lurking in the distance like an afternoon thunderstorm. She saw the demons coming to her Arendan and crawling into bed with him. She saw the silver weapon with her name on it crossing with a demon's blade in the shape of a phallus, the two weapons ringing as they clashed. She saw him in a life or death struggle with the demon, covered in giant insects, and she saw him lying on the ground in a terrible place, the demons all around him, eating him. No, please, my life for his, my soul for his. And worst of all, she saw clawed hands around his throat trying to wring the life out of him. The hands were chalk white, delicately formed with long fingers and ended in a stout set of black claw-like fingernails. Those hands, could they be her hands? Her own? She forced the thoughts from her head, and there they simmered for a time, grew dark, and came again. And strangest of all, she saw herself doing the unthinkable. She saw herself one day going against the demons, running from them, plotting their ruin, and it would all begin with her walking into an elder den full of mystery. The mystery den. Sammidoran told her grandmother of her visions. "Who is this boy? What is his name?" "Oh, I don't know, but I want him. After all this time, I love him. He's my Arendan at last." "Arendan," her grandmother replied, shocked. "Have you not gone to the wall? Have you not been instructed to do that?" "I did, and I chose not to plant my flower there. I didn't want it to end." "Anuians," she spat. "You understand you are condemning yourself to a bitter end. The demons will come for you, and for your Arendan too." "I won't let them. You taught me to fight. I won't let that happen." Despite her better judgment, her grandmother admired her spirit, very courageous for such a young person. Her grandmother buried herself near the lake and had visions. She saw the demons taking an interest in her granddaughter, to take the love she felt for this elder boy and twist it into a tragedy. The demons were always waiting to pounce on Monama love and use it for their own ends. But she also saw her granddaughter having great resolve, and with this elder boy at her side, what possibilities! Sammidoran described the castle in the mountains, the cold, and her grandmother's frequent presence there. She described the weapon that hung at his side, a long, sword-like weapon, but it wasn't a sword, it was a metal tube with a handle. Her grandmother smiled. "That is a carg. That's what it is called," she said. "You are having visions of Castle Blanchefort, far to the north. You are seeing the son of Lord Davidge and Countess Sigillis of Blanchefort. He is not yet born. Even now he still rests in his mother's womb." Sammidoran had been dreaming of a boy, not yet a minute old, and she was intrigued. She spent much of her time thinking about this unborn boy, this Lord Blanchefort, a boy who one day was to do great things, a boy who will one day hold her in his arms, a boy who will be eaten by demons or worse, be torn to shreds by her own hands. She sat there in the fog, lost in a dream, addicted to it like a narcotic. She talked to him, though he wasn't there. She'd laugh, and sometimes she'd argue with him as well. He was so stubborn. Why'd he have to be so stubborn? She said his name, for she now knew it too. It echoed to her from future's maelstrom. Kay, Lord Cable of Blanchefort. This unborn boy was her only friend, her confidant, and her lover. Living up to her name, she began using her power to blink far to the north to Castle Blanchefort, and there she prowled the castle and gazed out the windows to the majestic scenery outside. She tried going outside to the wondrous grove behind the castle to look around, but it was so cold. She could feel her skin freezing and her throat tightening. She could only withstand it for a few minutes before having to go back inside the castle. In a dusty corner of the southern wing of the castle, she located the currently unused tower where the boy will one day live, and she walked around investigating it, haunting the place as an invisible little ghost. Although now a quiet and unused place, one day it will be brimming with life, for not only will Kay live in this wing, but so too his sisters and brothers and cousins, each getting their own colossal tower to grow up in. Zorn Tower. Here was Kay's tower. That's what its name was. Her Kay. Rolling around in its darkened interior, she wrote her name on the walls in several select spots with her long, sharp fingernail. She explored the tower from top to bottom. It was a huge place, over 150 stories high, bigger all by itself than the whole of Castle Astralon. She went to the dusty, disused places in the tower, and sometimes visited the rooms and galleries, where she would one day pass time with Kay, acting out scenes from the future to herself. She was very excited when the Lord and Countess Blanchefort began getting the tower ready for the new arrival. Though his birth was still months away, she felt the wheels were in motion, that things were finally starting to happen. Seeing the Countess, a beautiful red-headed elder woman with her pregnant belly, she was desperate to reach out and touch it. It drove her mad, so she sometimes considered presenting herself to Countess Blanchefort and demanding to touch her belly. That was Kay resting within. Her Aaron Dan. He belonged to her, and she felt entitled. But patience. Patience. Soon, her love will be born. They had their staff clean the 150-store tower from top to bottom, and a team of skilled craftsmen were there building the furniture Kay would one day use. She watched as they skillfully built Kay's bed. She was breathless as she watched them work. Kay's bed, the things she and Kay will share there, do there. She sat in the corner and trembled. She didn't want to wait. If only she could travel through time. Kay's room and new nursery will be on the terrace levels, and Sammidoran helped get his room ready. Not an idler by any means, she tried to help the staff out when she could. One day she picked up a sponge when the staff went down for lunch and scrubbed the walls. She was shocked when Lord Blanchefort came in. He knelt down and smiled. "Well, hello," he said as she stood there holding the sponge. He spoke in Elder, which her grandmother had taught her to speak. "Are you Lady Sammidoran? You must be. Your grandmother has told me all about you, and I've been eager to make your acquaintance," he said. He told her that as she was the granddaughter of Countess Hortensia of Monama, that she was always welcome there, and he grabbed another sponge, and together the Lord and the pale little girl finished scrubbing the walls. She had a strange vision one night, and unlike the vision she had of Kay, she never had that particular vision again, but she remembered it. She never forgot a single detail. The Olno. She dreamed of the Olno. It was a vision that could possibly change everything. The day before Kay was born was when she saw her first demon in the flesh. She had run out to the sea with a basket full of stuffing and thread. There, out in the sun, she put the finishing touches on a little stuffed animal she had been working on. Her basket was open, and all her materials were carefully arranged in front of her. It was a gazelle made of a colorful patchwork of red, blue, green, and gold fabrics. It had green buttons for eyes, just like his eyes will be. Her grandmother had gotten her all the components for its making, and she'd spent weeks working on it. Like all of her people, she had strong, dexterous hands, and though she had never made a stuffed animal before, it was quite accomplished. A master toy maker couldn't have done better. She was going to give it to Kay as a gift from her to him. It was a modest gift. He was a great elder lord, born into money and power and technological items she could only wonder over. But as she made this little gazelle all on her own and had poured every bit of care and love she had into its making, she hoped one day it might mean something to him. She dreamed of talking to him about it one day. "Kay, I made that little gazelle for you before you were born. I made it just for you. I hope you come to love it, Aaron Dan, as I love you." She was restless and impatient. She wanted Kay. She wanted him born. She wanted him out in the world with her. And then she could feel eyes all over her, watching and laughing. Demons, there they were, staring at her from behind a tree, leering, bleeding, skinless. "Hiya, Sam," they hissed. "What are you doing?" Terrified, she dropped everything and turned to run home. Wait! The gazelle! She'd left it there! She turned to grab it and then run away as fast as she could. A demon stood there, holding the gazelle by the neck, squeezing it in her bloody fist. The demon was female, miserably thin and dripping half-clotted blood. She was horribly bent at the torso. She stank, as she heard the demons always do. "You forget this?" the demon said in a callow voice, holding up the stuffed gazelle. Sammidoran stood there, powerful but helpless, before the demon, who could not be fought. She worked so hard on that little gazelle. That was for Kay. She hated the demon. She hated them all. Moving like an uncoiling serpent, she tore off across the grassland, leaving the demons behind in a hurry. "Run, run, Sam," they called to her. "Run all you want. We got plans for you. All in good time." She sat by a favorite tree later that afternoon and wept, her hands to her face. She'd always considered herself so bold and brave. She thought herself fearless, yet when standing face to face with the hated demons at last, she found herself powerless. She had been afraid. She had been racked with fear, and she'd lost Kay's toy, Gazelle. She felt herself a failure, and so she wept. As she sat there and cried, she became aware of something creeping through the grass toward her. The demons, it had to be. She stood and made to run away. But approaching the tree low in the grass was an odd sort of animal. It was small and shiny, with a smooth domed head and a set of long whiskers. It didn't have legs, but rather flippers like the turtles do that swam in the lake water. It seemed to her like it belonged in the water, or in the air, or anywhere else it wished to go. It was a beautiful little animal, and she didn't feel afraid any longer. It held something in its mouth. It set whatever it was holding down and backed away. It looked at her expectantly with bright eyes and twitched its whiskers. The toy gazelle she had lost to the demons lay in the grasp. There it was, unharmed and unblemished by the demon's hand, a patchwork of colorful cloth. She was elated as she picked it up. She wished to bow and thank the little animal for delivering it to her. Surely he was a messenger of the gods sent to uplift her spirits. Perhaps he was a god himself. Now she'd have a gift to give Kay. The animal was gone as quickly as it had come. Cradling the gazelle, she ran home. She was bursting with joy. As she ran, she thought she heard a kind voice say over her shoulder, "You worked so hard on that, Sam. Seemed like a shame to lose it." The next day, Sammidoran and her grandmother went north to Castle Blanchefort, She had been invited to be in attendance as the next Lord of Blanchefort was born. Many people were there, all elders. She had never seen so many at once before. She stood there in her black gown next to her grandmother, holding her hand, as many people came to peer into Lord Cable's crib. As they waited for their turn, she held the little gazelle to her. It took some time, but eventually they arrived at the front of the line. Countess Hortensia picked her up and allowed her to look down into his crib. There he was, mere hours old, yet she had known him for years. Such kind fate, she said to her grandmother in her Anui tongue as she stared at him, her heart racing. As she took in the sight of this newly born baby whom she had seen in her dreams, she made a promise to herself. She would ignore and abjure what her aunts and uncles said about life, about fate, about giving up when things looked bad. All the things she'd seen, the goodness, the love, the laughs, his arms around her, and the darkness waiting for her that she tried to ignore. "We've got plans for you," the demon had said. "A dark future is coming." She would follow her grandmother's advice. If the future looked bad, then do something about it. Change it. Fight for it. The things she had seen regarding this tiny baby who was now right in front of her, both the good and the bad, were worth it. What will be created between them was worth it. "I am going to be strong for you, Kay. I am going to watch over you, and I am going to be there when you need me. I'm going to keep the other girls away, for there is only me. Me!" She then took the stuffed gazelle she'd made and gave it to Kay as a gift. She propped it up against the side of his crib and was led away. And with that, we conclude Prologue 3, Born in a Jar. So there it is. That chapter took me a long time to write because there was a lot of info to present and not be just a info dump. Those suck. Tried to present it in a way that would be inviting and captivating and move the plot forward. The plot always needs to go forward. So we meet Sam, Lady Sammidoran of Monama, and the Monamas are indigenous people to Cana. They live in the southern parts of Cana by Lake Monama, a very deep lake, always shrouded in fog, and there's a lot of Monama tribes. We heard about Sam's tribe, the Astralons. There's the Nebulons, the Minzers, the Cardinals, the Darathons, the Finooks, and many more. And the Monama people, like I said, are indigenous to Cana, while the elders are transplants from other worlds, as we'll find out later. They are bone white with black hair and black eyes. They're incredibly strong and incredibly fast. They can do a whole lot of gift-like abilities. They can do quite a bit. They can see the future if they bury themselves in the ground. They're very associated with Cana, as we find out in later books. If you take a Monama away from Cana, they quickly grow sick and die. Being close to the ground on Cana is essential for them. And also, the warmth of the southern areas of Cana is also essential. If you put them into colder climates, that is quickly fatal for them. Anything below 60 or 50 degrees will kill them in a very short period of time. And we'll find out that that was very important long ago, because Sam said that they were evil once the Monamas were horrifically bestial and cruel, but we'll find out about that later. And they all begin to have visions, and it's usually of the elders. They dream of their Erendan, who's like a girl dreaming of a boy, and a Sila Tila, which is a boy dreaming of a girl. And they see these visions in their head, and they're very potent and powerful. But it's believed that the visions they get are given to them by these horrible demons that they keep talking about, that keep tormenting them, that enslave them for the most part, and that it's the demons giving them these visions, and that they have some sort of mysterious purpose for that. And they follow a usual ritual where they take the flower of white amelia, which is a very sacred plant, one that grows well in low light and shade, as you have by Lake Monama in the fog. You take it and you bury it by the morning wall, and that will mystically put an end to your visions, and it'll hurt and it'll be horrible for a while, but the dreams will go, and then you'll be free of it for the rest of your life. And Sam started dreaming about this little boy far to the north with weird colored hair and green eyes. At first, she tried to be empirical. She's like, I've heard of my brothers and sisters and my kin having these dreams. I don't see what the big deal is. But night after night, she would have these dreams. And eventually, this vision of this little boy began to get to her, began to lure her in and show her wondrous things. He taught her all kinds of stuff. He showed her rare technological creations. He showed her the foods of his people. And Monamas are very passionate people. They have a huge libido, and they love sensory things. They love eating tasty foods, and it's all kinds of things like that. And food is very big for Monamas, and they just love elder food. So she's in her dreams getting samples of all this food, which isn't real, but she wakes up and she's like, oh my God, that was just a dream. I don't want it to be a dream. I want it to be real. And slowly but surely, this little boy becomes her errand Dan. She begins to feel for him. She begins to await her dreams with this kid, and she would dream of talking to him and sometimes arguing with him, to this vision, that she's having, like, why are you so stubborn? And she found him handsome, and eventually in her dream she began to having amorous relations with this dream. And again, Monamas have a huge libido, and they breed like rabbits. Though the demons, whoever these demons are, they're pretty gross. They keep them thinned out. As I mentioned, there's two different kinds of these Monama peoples. There's the little ones, or the Konaks, who are pretty thin and small. Stand maybe an average of 5'3", I guess. Even though they're small, they're still extremely strong, extremely fast. And there used to be a larger version of the Monamas, the greater Monamas, or the Anuians as they call them. And the Anuians went up against the demons long ago, and the demons wiped them out of existence for their temerity. But the Anuian bloodline still exists amongst the Konaks, the little ones, and every so often a Anuian is born. Like Sam is an Anuian. She's a greater Monama. But Konaks only take about 3 months to develop in the womb and be born. Anuians need about 6 months. So they have a person, a very honored person called a searcher, who whenever there's a birthing, the searcher checks and sees if they find a little embryo mixed in amongst all the newborn Monamas. If they do, they take them to the jar. It's like a jar, and it's full of brine water and white amelia flowers, and they put the embryo in there, and they bury it in the ground, and the embryo thrives in this jar, and then about 3 months later comes out fully developed. And that's what Sam's experience, and she keeps the jar she was born in on her windowsill as a reminder of her parents who were taken by the demons. So this chapter again was to impress upon you that Sam didn't just wake up one day and go, I love this person. I'm going to be devoted to this person for the rest of my life. It didn't happen like that. It took years. Experiencing this was like a narcotic almost, and she became almost addicted to it. So she feels very strongly for this kid, this Lord Blanchefort, who at the very end of the chapter was finally born. And she presented him with a little gazelle that she had made all on her own and gave it to him as a gift. And when her grandmother lifted her up so she could peer down into his crib, and she saw him for the first time after, no more dreams, no more years of delusion. There he is. And then she looked at her grandmother and said, what kind fate will be created between this kid and me is worth everything. So that is our introduction to Sam, Lady Monama of the Castle Astralon. And I mentioned the various drafts of this book. Sam, in the original draft, was not a Monama. She was totally different. She was just an elder girl of very poor means. Yeah, she was just... I'll explain more as time goes on, as we get to know Sam going forward in the book. But all this Monama stuff came much later. She started out as just an elder girl. And there's a character that we're going to meet much later down the line who looks like Sam originally looked. And I'll point her out when she shows up. It's not going to be for a while, but she looks exactly like I had initially described Sam. We will see, and I hope I put the work in. I hope you understand why Sam feels the way that she does in the future chapters, why she's so persistent, why she's so single-minded. See that it didn't just come from out of nowhere, that she spent a good deal of her life interacting with this kid who hadn't even been born yet. That's the end of the prologues. Next week we move into part 1, which is called Kay and Sam, of all things. And chapter 1 is called The Pale Ghost. So we're chugging along now. We're getting into the heart of the book. We've met one main character, Sam. And we're going to meet another one next week, Kay, the kid who was just born, the object of Sam's desire. So that'll be next week. So until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.